a representative of the Senate leadership, I just want to welcome you all to our media availability. We have been working on, we just released within the last hour the capital budget from the Senate, and working on not only the budget items but the Hearst bill that is over in the House right now. So just and a variety of other issues, but want to welcome our House counterparts. In fact, you've got 2/3 of the 13th district right here.
Right,
So
yeah. So fighting 13th.
fighting 13th. So.
And I'm Representative Manwiller. I've been here before, and I am joined today by Representative Stokesbury from the 31st, who is one of our leads on budget and finance. The news out of the House this week, obviously, is the release of the House Democratic budget. We expect that to be exec'd out of committee this afternoon. We're expecting a floor vote Friday, if all things go as planned. Obviously, the Republicans plan on offering some amendments to those. In the meantime, we are also very interested in the release of the House Democratic transportation budget. We're closely monitoring the events going on with ST3, and we will obviously have some amendments with respect to that. And then as we approach the end of session, we are very interested in making sure that there's a Hearst fix in the mix for the final negotiations.
And I didn't introduce my colleagues, forgot about that. Senator Honeyford, the chair of the capital budget, Senator Braun, chair of the operating, and Senator Dino Rossi, the vice president of the Ways and Means. So, ready to go?
Yeah, I know official negotiations on the budget haven't started yet, but I also know that there's ongoing negotiations about paid family leave. And the House budget included some startup costs for paid family leave programs. And any of you talk about what, if any, role that paid family leave bills have within the overall budget discussion?
Well, I'm part of that group that has been put together by Senator Kaiser and Senator Fain, and I'm participating along with Gina McCabe and Representative Robinson from the Democratic side. We're having some initial meetings. There's obviously been a variety of drafts of paid family leave bills. One of the major sticking points is that according to ESD, there is an $80 million startup cost, which is hard to put in anybody's budget. There's some discussion about using some of the revenue collected to bear those costs in the long run. But we're still pretty far apart about who it would apply to. Would there be small business exemptions? Would there be tax exemptions? So although it's late in the session, I'd have to say these are still some initial conversations on paid family leave.
So we offered a couple different versions of the bill earlier in the session along with Senator Kaiser, and we obviously didn't fund it in the budget because we haven't reached agreement on this issue. I think it's one of the items we came to town to work on, but as Representative Manwiller indicated, we don't have any kind of agreement yet.
And there were startup costs that were allocated years ago when this bill was first passed by the legislature but never funded. Did those just get absorbed back into the general fund once it became clear that the bill wasn't going to be funded? Do you know what happened to those startup costs that were allocated by the legislature a decade ago?
I'm not sure. It was a little before my time, but my understanding is we never actually funded any of the costs for that bill. We passed the bill, but never funded either the startup costs or the ongoing costs, is what I understand. But again, that was.
And that's my understanding as well, is that they did the policy, but not any of the funding, and it sat on the books unfunded for almost a decade.
When the Democrats unveiled their budget, Representative Cody talked about a $1.5 billion Medicaid waiver, from which I understand the feds are want to send $1.5 billion to the state regarding the paying on health costs. She says the Dee's budget uses all of that, and she criticized your proposal for not embracing that fully. Is her interpretation correct? And if it is, can you explain your position on that?
So the Medicaid waiver that was approved is actually, there's three parts of it. We did use one part that seemed to fit in our budget and didn't have what I would characterize as significant risk associated with it. And the concern there is, and this is always the case when you use federal funding, is that you have there's a tail that goes with it that costs the state money in the out years. So we're very cautious about walking into additional federal funding without fully understanding the long-term cost. So I would just say we have a difference of opinion on whether this risk is worth taking, given, you know, the uncertainty coming out of Washington DC. It seems like we ought to be cautious with how we take on federal, you know, the free federal money is never as free as it sounds.
Is part of, does part of that worry stem from taking Medicaid expansion money, only to see it now possibly, it sort of changes every day, but possibly go away?
Not directly. I would just say it's a broader concern that, look, you know, the federal government has its own budget challenges, an enormous deficit. We know there's going to be long-term pressure on federal money, you know, with or without whatever they do on Medicaid. This is just, you know, before you expand programs you're going to fund long-term with state dollars, we should be really careful before we walk in there. And that should be true, you know, really any year, but certainly as the federal deficit continues to grow and any type of federal money gets more and more, I think, at risk.
What would be the state's obligation, assume a scenario where the state takes the whole $1.5 billion, what would be the state's obligation in the near term, and what would the state's obligation be in the long term?
So this is exactly the question. It's a hard question to answer, and this is why of the three parts we take a single part, and it's a relatively small part, because we don't think there's a significant risk, long-term financial risk to the state in those parts. But in the other areas, you know, especially the affordable communities of health, there's just a lot of uncertainty about what is required of the state in the out years, and it's that uncertainty that gives us pause.
I have bills coming up in human services right after we're done here. 5903, I think it's the bill that funds services for the homeless. Does that have any traction in your conversation?
I am not familiar with that bill number, so can you be more specific?
It's I think it doubles and permanently enacts the documents of fees that are going to have been funding TANF and some of these other services. And the bill seems like it has all D co-sponsors. That's what I was wondering. Does it have any?
So we have passed two bills. One was from Senator Fain, one from Senator Malosha, that extended the recording fee, but we don't extend it indefinitely. We have a sunset on it in both those cases. So the two bills that we have that deal with that issue have both been passed out of Ways and Means. They're in rules right now.
And another bill that is going to sail through the House, went through the committee yesterday, exec today. This is the bill that breaks up DSHS, creates the children, family. Does this look like it's going to be the year that DSHS is broken up?
I actually was on the Blue Ribbon Commission that would do that, and I would like to see it happen. You know, can we do it financially, because there was a pretty big price tag put on that, but I would like to see us continue that conversation, and haven't talked directly to Senator Brown about it, but it seems that we could help families in crisis a little bit better if we took the Children's Administration out of the DSHS department.
So, if I may follow up on that. So we don't do that in our budget, and there's a lot of conversation about it. There's also both pro and con. There's a lot of concerns that, you know, historically when we've done this, you know, reorganization of the deck chairs, that has led to, one, increased cost, and two, no better services delivered. Now, I warrant, and you know, there's a lot of good work that's gone into this, and it's been thought through. We have a shared concern for the clients served by this agency, and that we need to do better as a state. So I think there's shared concern both across the aisle and across the rotunda about this issue, but we're not quite there yet. There's both an immediate startup cost to do this, which is a concern. There's also a real big concern that, you know, for example, when we separated out HCA from DSHS, the way that those positions are matched with federal funding, when they're combined in a big agency like that, you can be as low as 20% state cost on FTE and 80% federal. When you spread them apart, then you reduce that match. So there's a whole bunch of hidden cost here that we really have to understand. Again, we want to be really careful if we make it, you know, our intentions, I think, are very good and very laudable. We want to make sure if we do it, we can afford to pay the bill, not just this year, but years in the future. And so, again, caution is, I I think, the word of the day. And
So would you anticipate not doing that in this biennium budget and waiting for 2 years, or?
So I think, as Senator Warnick said, I think there's still discussions going on. I don't think I can say for certain whether it's doable this year or not. I think that we're very cautious. We think it could take a little longer we need to take a little longer to understand the immediate, but more importantly, the long-term costs. I think as those costs become more clear, it'll be more obvious whether we can do that now or in the future.
Democrats have criticized the Senate's property tax plan for focusing really on flattening out the rate of property taxes as opposed to the actual amount people might pay based on their assessed value. What is your response to that your plan focuses more on changing the rate people are paying as opposed to focusing on equity in terms of how much they actually pay based on their property values?
I think it's a strange argument, if you ask me. I mean, we don't say your income tax at the federal level or your sales tax at the state level should be different based on anything other than the percentage. If you buy, we don't say it's X percent. We use a flat rate. There's really not any effective way to get around a flat rate. There's no fairer way than to say as a percentage of what you spend or what your home is worth that we're going to charge you based on that. That's how we do it now. That's how. So it's I just find that a strange argument. What is their alternative? Do they want to blow up our entire tax system and have individual rates by person, by job? And so I'm not sure how to address that. The reality is if you have a $500,000 home in Seattle, it's worth $500,000. If you have a $200,000 home in Seattle, it's worth $200,000. And the same thing is true whether it's in Seattle or Chehalis or Pasco or Spokane, and that's how we do property tax. I don't know, so I'm frankly unsure how to answer that question. It's just an odd argument.
And this is a group of legislators who have been demanding since the initial McCleary litigation that we need a more progressive tax system in Washington. And they got exactly what they asked for, and now they're complaining about it, right? So what did they think a progressive tax system looked like? That everybody was going to pay less taxes, that we were all going to pay the same taxes? Progressive, by their definition, is the wealthier you are, the more you pay. Well, they live in a wealthy area, and the wealthy people who own very expensive houses are going to pay a little bit more. This is the tax system they asked for a decade. And, for them to criticize the Senate budget, when they have a budget, which we haven't talked about at all here, a budget that relies on a mythical $7.8 billion in taxes that we haven't seen, nobody believes they have the votes for, I would suggest that they get their own budget in order in terms of how are they going to pay for it. I mean, they have $7.8 billion hole in a budget that they're going to run out of committee today that there's no funding for.
But how closely tied is the property value where you live, like Seattle median home value is a certain price, to your ability to pay? How closely?
It's actually highly correlated. Over 90% of the variation in home price by school district can be explained by family median income in that district. So of course you can always find some outlier, somebody that moved into downtown Seattle 75 years ago and paid $10,000 for their house and now it's worth $1 million and they don't have $1 million in their bank account. Of course there's going to be outliers on both ends of the spectrum. But over 90% of the variation can be explained by income, and income really is a good measure of ability to pay. So it's really not that unfair, and I don't think that Seattle's poor housing choices, housing policy choices should drive tax policy for the rest of the state. There's a reason Seattle is unaffordable to almost everybody right now, and it has nothing to do with the six of us sitting up here. And I don't think that decisions that the Seattle politicians make should then drive tax consequences for the entire rest of the state.
The other thing I heard yesterday when they unveiled their plan is that how confusing the property tax thing was. That's saying that somehow what we have right now isn't confusing. I guarantee you there are really no parents out there that can really explain how the schools are funded. What we're trying to do is make it simple, and it really is going to be simple, where it's $1.55 per thousand, and then the levy above that is going to be going not for salaries and benefits. Right now, it's such a mixture. There's only a handful of people in Olympia that actually understand how it works. And I think the education establishment, the defenders of the status quo, love it that way because they're the ones that can move the levers.
Representative Manuel, you had mentioned that they want a progressive tax system. They got the
Mm-hmm.
Using that logic and that reasoning, would you support the proposal to revise the real estate excise tax in what it appears to be a more progressive approach, where those who own less, or buy lower value property will pay a lower rate than those who buy the expensive properties?
Well, most Democratic tax reform plans ends up with everybody paying more taxes, right? And so I probably.
The rate actually drops for a person who buys a $200,000 home.
There would be
their
some
plan would pay
winners
less
and there
than
would be
they
some losers. But on the aggregate, their tax plan adds $7.8 billion to an economy.
I just want to understand
Oh,
why.
to one, I'd have to look at it in specific and see where the incident of the tax fell. And so, I mean, that's probably not as specific an answer as you want. But the reality is let's not forget, you can pick some winners and losers, right? Even their B&O tax plan that says we're going to exempt everybody under 2,050 of gross. Well, you can run that out to the media and say, oh, look, we're creating this great tax exemption. Well, no functioning small business grosses under $250,000 that actually hires people, right? So you're creating this mythical tax exemption to justify a massive tax increase on the back end. So you can find this one little piece of ripe fruit on a rotten tree, but at the end of the day, what you have is a plan that increases taxes by $7.8 billion on a state that is just coming out of a recession and if the Democrats get their way, our budget last year was $38 billion. By the end of their 4-year, we'll be at $51 billion. We are talking about a budget that in a 4-year time span goes from in the 30 billions to in the 50 billions. Taxpayers cannot afford that type of growth of government, especially when you point out the fact that all of their tax increases don't go to fund education, right? They can fully fund McCleary within a few $100 million within revenue growth. So all of those taxes, $7.8 billion, which they're going to tell you is for the kids, that $7.8 billion goes to pay for the growth of government outside of education. They can fund McCleary within existing revenues. They're choosing not to, and they're using children to justify a $7.8 billion tax increase to grow government.
I think they made clear that during their press conference and separately out of those press conferences that they also don't want to make cuts to services, social services, which the Senate budget does make some cuts to those. So I guess what's the criticism on them? They've never said that all of that money is going to education. They've said that some of it's going to mental health, some of it's going to to expand some of the programs that are cut in the Senate budget. So it seems like it's a difference in opinion on what should be paid in for government, not what's going toward education, because you guys are essentially spending the same.
Well, what do you say? We're both spending the same.
It's about
There's-
1.8 billion-ish.
Yeah.
1.8 billion-ish is a lot different, though.
I mean, it's not a,
Versus 1.8.
it's not a drastic.
If you
difference.
talked about you made reference to cuts in social services. On that, we have a significant increase in social service spending in our budget. We choose to do it in different places. We invest heavily in mental health because we think that's a root cause for a lot of the challenges we currently face in our society. And we do find efficiencies in other parts of the budget where we think that we can spend our money more wisely. But it's not anywhere near the $1.7 billion difference. If for a small fraction of that, you could cure, the perceived ills in our budget.
Do you think since they put B&O taxes on the table, is there any hope that you all see to maybe change how the B&O tax is calculated? They still are looking at gross receipts and not net profit or anything like that. Do you think since that's a key part of their budget, there's room for negotiation to make it so it's not the gross receipts that are charged, but the actual profits business are looking at? Are you working on that or thinking that's a possibility?
We believe they don't have the votes for their tax increases. Let's go there globally. They do not have the votes for their tax increases. And there's an old adage down here that if you actually have the votes, you vote, and if you don't, you talk. So they're talking right now. That's what they're doing. And we believe that they really don't. There's probably, 6 to 12 members in their caucus that probably wouldn't want to vote on these taxes. And so they really don't have anything more than a letter to Santa Claus if they can't actually fund these things. That's what we have to come down to in the end.
But you don't have the votes for your budget in the House, so there's still a middle ground.
There's going to be one budget that actually is funded, and that will be ours. Their budget is a fantasy budget that will not be funded. That's the reality. And so we can live in the real world, or we can live in a fantasy world. We choose to live in the real world.
So for you, B&O tax reform isn't on the table this year?
Well, I would remind you that last year it was Representative Drew McEwen, who's a Republican, who led the effort to reform the B&O tax system and did, yeoman's effort and went through 3 different mechanisms, but he did make that change to go to a nets receipts rather than a gross receipts, which of course is much a better environmental system for high capital startup costs, right? Where you have to spend $1 million to make $1 million in $1, right? So there you'd obviously want a net rather than a gross. So we have done serious work on this. It got a courtesy hearing, but it didn't get a vote or anything like that. So I just say our caucus has put in considerable intellectual effort into making that transition.
You know,
I'm-
push for it this year, I mean, if you've got the foundation for it, the background for it, why not bring it up this year?
Well, I think it's good policy. Personally, I'd like to go in that direction. Like Matt mentioned, Rep. McEwen really put all the intellectual thought behind it. There's a lot of members in our caucus that want to go that direction. I would guess that you guys have a lot of members in your caucus that want to go that direction. I think it's separate from budget negotiations because the idea of reform isn't to bring in new money. The idea is to create more fairness in the system. Right now you have low margin businesses like grocery stores and auto dealers that sometimes pay a higher B&O rate than their profit margin. And like Matt mentioned, you have startups that Amazon didn't turn a profit for the first 10 years, yet they were paying B&O tax despite not being profitable. We got lucky that Amazon stayed here. We got lucky that Microsoft hit it big. But most of the time when somebody has a great idea, they go to Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley says you should really locate here in California because you don't want to have to be paying taxes for your first 10 years of operation when you're still not profitable. And so we lose out on the next Amazon and the next Microsoft because of the B&O tax. Now, I think it's important for reform, but I think that's a good policy discussion to have in the Finance Committee from day one. I'm not sure it really moves either side in terms of the size of the box or budget negotiations.
Another budget question, the Real ID bill that came out of the Senate had a public hearing in the House, but it hasn't been execed out yet. Have you guys, what's going on over there? I mean, obviously I can talk to the Democrats about that too, but I'm guessing there's some involvement with Republicans as well as far as amendments or concerns about the bill. Do you know what's going on with that measure in the House, either of you?
I don't serve on transportation, I know that we all agree that it's important, as somebody who's, my wife travels all the time and she wants to be able to get on a plane with her driver's license. She's got a passport just in case, but we think it's important. Obviously, there's some concerns over there. We'd like to see it go a little farther, but we will end up with kind of a 2-license system, and if that's what we need to, keep our licenses valid, that's a good compromise.
Because it had sounded earlier like there might be a possibility that Republicans in the House would lock up on this issue. Has there been some smoothing over of that within the caucus?
I can't recall a conversation we've had about Real ID in the last week, and around here a week is a lifetime. But I will be happy to talk to Representative Orcutt for you and follow up with you.
Why not freeze tuition in your policy again for the next few years in your budget? I know we talked about that yesterday, but what's the downside of doing that as you had in the past, as the Democrats have proposed this year?
Well, I think, for one, it costs $100 million in the 4-year, and we are operating without $8 billion in fantasy money, so we didn't do that. And I think more fundamentally, this train has sailed. We recognized the issue 4 years ago. We acted on the issue both 4 years ago and 2 years ago to freeze and then reduce tuition, and I think more fundamentally put it on a long-term stable path so it doesn't have these huge increases, double-digit increases that we saw in the early part of this decade. So we think we have that on the right track, and we think the next issue to deal with is access, and we invest. We don't have $100 million, but we do have enough to invest in adding 1,800 new resident slots at our 4 universities, and we think that's a better investment for Washington State citizens right now. So,
do you think their budget goes far enough on that as far as adding slots, or do you think it goes
I don't believe they add slots. They freeze tuition. If they add slots, I missed that part of their budget. I'll go look that up.
I'm not sure they do. That's why I was asking.
No, so I think that we're on the right. I mean, naturally, I'm biased, but I think we're on the right path. That we've got tuition on a predictable, stable path that can't spike up over time, that fundamentally is related to earnings ability in the state. And that's the key part of that underlying bill, that it can't grow faster than median wage. So a student has a decent chance. I tell the story, when I was at UW, 3 decades ago, you could go out and get a job. You You could work during the school year, you could get a job in the summer, and you could pay your way through the University of Washington. You can't do that today. Now, we made a big dent to get it closer, and more importantly, we locked it to median wage over time, so it doesn't get further apart. But we've done that work. I think that we're on a better path now. And I think now the issue is how do we keep more of these students in the state of Washington? And that's why we make our investment.
You know, I think I remember hearing a Dino Rossi story about how he worked nights as a janitor at Seattle University. I haven't heard that story for 10 years, and I still remember it well. And I have the distinction, I think, of having the most student loan debt of any member of the legislature. That's what 7 years at private school will do to you. So, you know, I probably should have gone to in-state school, and it would be even better if I was going to in-state school right now, thanks to the work the Senate has done in the last 4 years. But yeah, I've got a lot of friends that wish they could have gone to school here in state and there weren't enough slots. So I think that this is a really good direction. And to answer your question, Melissa, I'm almost certain the House budget does not fund new undergrad slots at any of the 4 years.
Senator Braun, would you support a negotiation that would maybe reduce the number of slots and put the money into more financial aid, state need grants?
So we looked hard. I mean, as we looked at what we would do for higher ed this year, I mean, our caucus has been very committed to higher ed and to the students. We looked hard at the need grant and how we're spending that money, how that's helping students that couldn't otherwise attend university. And we really ran into a brick wall as we talked to the other side of the aisle about how can we reform the state need grant. Understand, we put $600 million of biennium into the state need grant. I think it's the highest, but if not, it's among the very highest in the country. And yet, you may have seen the report come out just recently that said only 40% of state need grant recipients graduate from college. We need to do better. We need to help these students get to success, and having them spend 2 or 3 years in college and then not getting a degree and not instead of directing them towards a career path that can help them be successful is just a waste for them and years of their lives. So I think we're very committed. I have been personally very committed to helping with the need grant, but we have to do reforms that help these students be successful and make sure that they're getting the best out of this program and the state's getting the best out of this program. So I remain open to the idea, but we ran into a block wall as we discussed that earlier in the session, and we decided not to pursue that any longer at this time.
One question before we end? Anybody have a last question?
I'll throw it out. Has your side thought about attacking budget negotiations differently this year? And I'll lay this on both sides. It seems to me like this year you're even starting farther apart than you did in 2013 and 2015. They're taking both sides are taking the exact same paths. I got a feeling you're going to spend a few weeks arguing over just getting yourselves into a common set of figures and a common set of common language just to even begin legitimately negotiating. Both sides have obvious non-starters for the other side. Have you given any thought to trying something different?
Like what?
Well, I think what would be different is if they actually voted to fund their budget.
Do the two sides even talk to each other during the
All the time?
off-season? Because you always come out, I mean, the one time when you had the education fix-it plan, two sides were not even on the same planet. And that's when you talk off-season. I always got the feeling that both sides are just talking past each other as opposed to talking with each other. And I just see the same pattern. Everyone's saying the exact same things they've said in the last 6 sessions I've covered, and you're even farther apart now than when you began the biennial things on 2013 and 2015.
It's gonna work out. It has every session since 1889. This is gonna be no different. And those discussions have all started to happen. There's some are informal, some are formal, that just talking to members. That's gonna happen.
Right. When McCleary started, there were like 5 or 6 things that had to be dealt with. We're down to 1. So despite, the occasional rancor, each and every year we have gotten a step closer to meeting McCleary, and we've done it right on time. And the court originally gave us till 2018, and here we are in the last session before 2018, and we have only one thing left to do, and the Senate budget pretty much takes care of that last thing. So yeah, politics is sometimes messy, but we have incrementally solved the problem that the voters sent us here to solve.
Thank you very much.
Thank
for
you.
coming.